Frú Vigdís Finnbogadóttir, Jón Atli Benediktsson, rektor Háskóla Íslands, handhafar Vigdísarverðlauna, góðir gestir, góðan daginn og verið hjartanlega velkomin á þessa opnunarhátíð alþjóðlegs áratugar frumbyggja tungumála hjá UNESCO hér á Íslandi og kynningu á sýningunni Mál í mótun sem Vigdísarstofnun, alþjóðleg miðstöð tungumála og menningar stendur fyrir. En athöfnin í dag fer fram á ensku og því mun ég nú skipta yfir á það tungumál. Former President of Iceland, Vigdís Finnbogadóttir, Jón Atli Benediktsson, Rector of the University of Iceland, Vigdís Prize winners, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to welcome you to the opening ceremony of the UNESCO's International Decade of Indigenous Languages here in Iceland, and an introduction to the Living Language Lab. Our host today is the Vigdís International Center for Multilingualism and Intercultural Understanding, and fitting where the center celebrated its 5-year birthday yesterday. My role here today as the chair of the Icelandic National Commission for Iceland, for UNESCO, it's my pleasure to be here with you at this joyful and exciting event. I welcome the Vigdís International Center participation in the UNESCO Decade of Indigenous Languages and welcome the fact that their knowledge and experience is being put to use in cooperation between nations at UNESCO. The program here today is in 2 parts. First, we have the open ceremony with some short talks, and after the coffee break around 10, we'll reassemble here again in the aula, where a seminar will start with talks from the Vigdís Prize winners, Jónar Mikkelsen and Kati Fredriksson, and then Professor Peter K. Austin. We start the launch of Iceland's participation in the Decade of Indigenous Languages by giving the floor first to Tafik Yelassi, UNESCO Assistant Director General for Communication and Information. Please.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I am delighted to deliver this statement as part of the national launch in Iceland of the International Decade for Indigenous Languages. UNESCO serves as the lead UN agency for this decade, and you are eager to embark on a 10-year journey to strengthen global commitments for the preservation, revitalization, and promotion of indigenous languages. Today, we face a tremendous challenge. Many indigenous languages are in danger. Many indigenous language speakers and signers face marginalization and discrimination, and are not always free to use their language, which compounds other inequalities. They often have limited access in their own language to education, healthcare, public information, justice, and to the benefits of scientific and technological progress. We need to ensure that people have the right and freedom to use their chosen language, as this is an essential element for human dignity and the life of a community. It is also for peaceful coexistence and sustainable development. Languages allow us to interact with each other, to convey our thoughts, share and learn from each other. They also help us to maintain, safeguard and transmit our histories, identities, centuries-old wisdom and knowledge. By creating enabling conditions for languages, we'll be able to protect, promote and celebrate cultural diversity and heritage, as well as cultural expressions and practices. With languages, we'll build together a common and resilient future. UNESCO, in cooperation with the UN Department of Economic and Social Affairs, the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, UN country teams, and other UN system entities, started working with indigenous peoples' organizations, governments, scholars, civil society, and other public and private actors to implement the Global Action Plan for the International Decade of Indigenous Languages. This plan focuses on 3 elements. First, raising awareness about the importance for our societies of linguistic diversity and multilingualism. Second, encouraging legal recognition, intergenerational transmission, and functional usage of indigenous languages in all domains. Third, ensuring the availability of human, institutional, and financial resources needed to engage in joint action and partnerships. Allow me here to give you a few concrete examples. UNESCO is working with member states and partners to ensure inclusive and quality education for indigenous peoples, respecting their cultural practices and traditions. Facilitate access to multilingual public information and the development of digital technologies, tools, and services in indigenous languages, as well as promote the diversity of cultural expressions using indigenous languages in all types of media. Strengthen and develop inclusive cultural policies and creative industries, and safeguard the living heritage of indigenous peoples. Promote the integration of indigenous knowledge conveyed through indigenous languages in the efforts to address climate change. Today, I call upon all UNESCO member states, partners, networks, and associated stakeholders to urgently act for the preservation, revitalization, and promotion of indigenous languages. I am delighted that Iceland embarked on this journey by launching the International Decade at the national level. And I would like here to thank the Vigdis International Center for Multilingualism and Intercultural Understanding, which is a Category 2 center under the auspices of UNESCO. I would like to thank them for their effort and cooperation in the field of linguistic diversity. Cooperation with our network of Category 2 centers and partners is crucial to ensure the success of the decade, and the Vigdis International Center is an important actor in conveying that languages matter to all of us. Ladies and gentlemen, the International Decade of Indigenous Languages is everyone's decade. With this in mind, I wish you a great success with the launch of the decade in Iceland. Thank you for your attention.
And next, I would like to welcome Áslaug Dóra Eyjólfsdóttir, Secretary General for the Icelandic National Commission for UNESCO. Áslaug Dóra, please.
Vigdís Finnbogadóttir, Jón Atli Benediktsson, Rektor Háskóla Íslands, Vigdís Prize winners. On behalf of Minister of Culture and Business Affairs, Lilja Dögg Alfreðsdóttir, I want to convey her best wishes and regards to you all, especially to Jón Hart Mikkelsen and Kathy Fredriksson, who are with us today and are the first recipients of the International Prize for Culture, named after Vigdís Finnbogadóttir. The Icelandic government, the University of Iceland, and the Vigdís Finnbogadóttir Institute for Foreign Languages established the prize 3 years ago to honor and celebrate Vigdís's exemplary contribution to the world of language and culture. As is well known, linguistic and cultural diversity have always been of key significance to our former president, and in her spirit, the Vigdís International Center has focused its attention on strengthening small language communities, not least to safeguard the human cultural heritage which linguistic diversity preserves. Today, we also celebrate that the International Decade of Indigenous Languages is ahead of us. It is a strong commitment to save and to strengthen indigenous peoples' languages. The fact is that languages around the world continue to disappear at an alarming rate despite their immense value. UNESCO, as the only United Nations agency responsible for culture, must therefore work more actively than ever to promote, safeguard, and protect diverse cultural expressions and types of heritage. In UNESCO's work, it is priority to ensure access to diverse sources of information and cultural expression and activities, to protect multilingualism in general, and in particular, indigenous languages through the International Decade. As our world has gone through profound social transformations that have made our societies both interconnected and fractured, and have brought about immense needs for social cohesion and intercultural dialogue, the International Decade also focuses on mainstreaming and taking pride in linguistic diversity and multilingualism. Ladies and gentlemen, the world needs peace. And since war begins in the minds of men and women, it is in the minds of men and women that peace must be built. This is the message in the first line of UNESCO's constitution from 1945. This is not a hollow phrase. UNESCO means values, core values for all of us. To conclude, we want to thank the University of Iceland and the Vigdis International Center for organizing and hosting this important event. And we also thank Birna Arbisdóttir, who is the representative of Iceland in the steering committee of the International Decade, and the Vigdis Center for their valuable work. Languages play a crucial role in the daily lives of people around the world, not only as a tool for communication, education, and social integration, but they also have significant meaning to each person's identity, to their traditions, to their cultural history, and to their memory. Hopefully, the Decade for Indigenous Languages will inspire and engage people everywhere to foster understanding and respect for each other and the planet. Thank you.
Thank you, Áslaug Dóra. And now I'd like to welcome Jón Atli Benediktsson, Rector of the University of Iceland. Jón Atli, the floor is yours.
Dear Vigdis Prize winners, dear distinguished guests. As has already been stated, the International Decade of Indigenous Languages is now upon us, and it is officially launched in Iceland by this event, and we are delighted that the University of Iceland, through the Vigdis International Center for Multilingualism and Intercultural Understanding, is the main national promoter of the decade. Language has always been of great significance to Icelandic society, and the University of Iceland has played a key role in academic research and higher education in the field of languages. Iceland is now involved in global processes, and equality and diversity have become cornerstones in the university's strategic aim of helping to build a sustainable society. We therefore fully embrace the motto of the International Decade of Indigenous Languages, leaving no one behind, no one outside. We hope to make this motto a reality by 2032 and hereby declare our commitments to promoting equality and diversity in the study of indigenous people and languages, linguistic rights as human rights, language revitalization and preservation. By these means, we hope to help further the overall aim of the International Decade to draw attention to the critical loss of indigenous languages and the urgent need to preserve, revitalize, and promote them not only among our university community, but across Icelandic society. Furthermore, we believe that the University of Iceland, building on solid academic foundation and outstanding research and practice, can also contribute internationally by sharing our knowledge and expertise in areas such as language documentation and preservation in the digital age, digital tools for language learning and revitalization, overcoming challenges faced by small linguistic communities, and the importance of translations and cultural production for language development. On the occasion of this launch, I would like to highlight several initiatives that attest to the university's long-term commitment to appreciating languages and linguistic diversity and our track record in this area. The University of Iceland is a proud host to two prominent institutions named after former President of Iceland, Vigdís Finnbogadóttir, who is Goodwill Ambassador of UNESCO of Languages. The first one is the Vigdís Finnbogadóttir Institute for Foreign Languages, a research center within the School of Humanities that honors Vigdís for her contributions to foreign language learning and appreciation through her work in the field of culture and languages. The second one is the Vigdís International Center for Multilingualism and Intercultural Understanding, a UNESCO Category 2 center that began operations on 20th of April 2017. That is 5 years ago when Veröld, the House of Vigdís, was opened, placing great emphasis on multicultural knowledge as well as on multilingualism as a tool to facilitate personal, cultural, and economic achievements. In 2020, on the occasion of Vigdís's 90th birthday and the 40th anniversary of her historical election as President of Iceland, the Icelandic government, the University of Iceland, and the Vigdís Finnbogadóttir Institute of Foreign Languages established an international prize in her name. The Vigdís Prize is awarded annually to an individual who has broken new ground in their work in the name of culture and languages in particular. The aim is to honor and highlight Vigdís's extraordinary contributions to languages and culture, which people in Iceland are very much aware of. In 2020, Jónhard Mikkelsen became the first recipient of the Vigdís Prize for his contribution to strengthening and developing Faroese, both within the Faroe Islands and abroad. Through his work, Jónhard Mikkelsen has played a vital role in strengthening the Faroese language and consolidating its position as a living language in the age of globalization. In 2021, the Vigdís Prize was awarded to Kati Fredriksen for her significant contributions to the language of Greenland through her poetry, scholarly writings, children's literature, and participation in public debate. Kati's activism and her efforts to raise awareness of Greenlandic language issues, both domestically and internationally, are remarkable. We are delighted to have both Vigdís's Prize winners here with us today. And on behalf of the University of Iceland, I would like to just give you a small gift and flowers to celebrate that you are here. So I would like to step down and ask Vigdís to be with us for a small ceremony here. Please stay here. It's a little complicated. Takk hérlega. So we continue, and I would like to take this opportunity to say that the winner of the 2022 Vigdís Prize will be announced later today. And I call on our partners and collaborators in the International Decade of Indigenous Languages to publicize the prize and raise awareness about it internationally. It's a very important award, and again, I congratulate the prize winners, but there are more to come. The most recent initiative of the university is in the exhibition room of Veröld, House of Vigdís, that hosts the Living Language Lab, a multimedia glimpse into the world of languages where young audiences can discover how languages have evolved over the course of human history and how they have migrated around the globe. And it is opening today, and it's very impressive, I can say. This exhibition has been developed by a team of acclaimed linguists at the University of Iceland, led by Professor Birna Arnbjörnsdóttir, in collaboration with the companies Gagarin and Andrum. The University of Iceland is proud to support this initiative, since the Living Language Lab is a state-of-the-art tool for communicating specialized knowledge about the history of linguistic diversity in Iceland and globally to students and everyone that is interested. By sharing these messages with future Icelandic generations, we hope to encourage awareness, understanding, and knowledge about the importance and the equality of all languages. In conclusion, I would like to agree with Dr. Tawfik Yalassi's statement that this is a decade that is for all of us. I call on all citizens, experts, and stakeholders to join us in raising awareness about the importance of linguistic diversity and the critical loss of languages. Only by valuing and supporting diversity and the equality of cultures, languages, and people can we build a diverse, informed, democratic, and sustainable society. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Jón Atli. Next, I would like to welcome Ólaf Goðarsdóttir, the Dean of the School of Humanities at the University of Iceland. Ólaf, please.
Frú Vigdís Finnbogadóttir, Jón Atli Benediktsson, rektor Háskóla Íslands, Anne-Sophie Grimaud, forstöðumaður eða sem fer fyrir stjórn Vigdísarstofnunar, prize winners of the Vigdís Finnbogadóttir Prize, Kati Fredriksen and Jón Hart Mikkelsen, dear guests. It is a pleasure for me to take part in the ceremony where the Decade of Indigenous Languages is formally opened. It is appropriate that the two prize winners of the International Prize awarded in the name of Vigdís Finnbogadóttir were able to join us today. But for well-known reasons, they have not been able to visit Iceland in the past 2 years. The current event has been organized by the Vigdís International Center for Multiculturalism and Intercultural Understanding. The center operates under the auspices of UNESCO and is the most important organization operating under the Vigdís Finnbogadóttir Institute for Foreign Languages at the University of Iceland. That was now presented by Jón Atli Benediktsson. Some of the main objectives of the center are to promote multilingualism in order to further understanding, exchange, and respect between cultures and nations. Another objective is to raise awareness of the importance of languages as a core element of the cultural heritage of mankind. It is also important for the Center to promote translation and translation studies, and it has worked to preserve languages and create awareness of language policies and control of languages with multiculturalism as a guiding light. As many of you know, the current main emphasis of the Vigdis Center is directed towards indigenous languages and small languages in limited geographical areas, the small number of native speakers. The center has also focused on the ecology of languages in the West Nordic regions. And furthermore, it has opened an exhibition, the Living Language Lab, that we were just talking about. And today we will have the opportunity to visit the Language Lab. The Vigdis Center has, since its founding in 2013, organized numerous symposia, lectures, courses, and exhibitions. One of those events is the current symposium, and after the coffee break, Anne-Sophie Grimaud, who is the current chair of the International Center, she will head a panel with Kati Fredriksen, Jónhard Mikkelsen, and Peter Austin, who is a professor at the University of London, where we will be able to talk about cultural production of languages, future perspective from the West Nordic perspective. I would like to end this talk by taking the opportunity to thank Vigdis Finnbogadóttir and Auður Hauksdóttir, the former chair of the Vigdis Center, for their contribution to multiculturalism and the mutual understanding between culture and nations. Thank you very much, and welcome to this event.
Thank you, Olaf. Next, I would like to welcome Anne-Sophie Nielsen-Grimaud, Associate Professor of Danish and Chair of Vigdis International Center for Multilingualism and Intercultural Understanding. Anne-Sophie, please.
Góðan daginn. Dear Vigdis, dear Jón Atli Benediktsson, Rector, dear prize holders, dear colleagues, dear distinguished guests, in 2019, the United Nations General Assembly resolution called for urgent steps at the national and international levels to preserve, revitalize, and promote indigenous languages. A global action plan of the International Decade of Indigenous Languages was drafted, as some of you were present. It was drafted to provide all stakeholders with essential principles for embarking on joint action. This is the work that we at the Vigdis International Center are extremely proud of taking part in. We will work with stakeholders, artists, researchers, language practitioners to share experiences and develop ideas together. We are not least looking forward to a decade where we already know we will learn a lot. Our role will also be to mediate the knowledge that we gain to the public. In many ways, Iceland is a unique place to have as a point of departure for this International Decade of Indigenous Languages. Firstly, because of Iceland's rich oral and written tradition, Icelandic language policies, and preservation practices. Secondly, because of the respect and trust that former President Vigdis Finnbogadóttir has built up through a lifetime around the world as a UNESCO Goodwill Ambassador for Languages. And thirdly, because of the position that Iceland has within the Nordic and West Nordic region. Depending on the perspective, Iceland can be a bridge, a buffer zone, a central arena, a role model, and a partner. We envision the Vigdis International Center primarily as a platform for a joint effort of academics and practitioners in raising awareness about the status of small, indigenous, and minority languages in various ways. During the decade, our special focus at the Vigdis International Center will be on Romani languages and literature. It will be on the languages of the West Nordic region, and it will be on the Sami languages. So far, our preparation for the IDIL decade has been done under the headline Cultural Production and Language Futures. In the strategy that we have presented to the government of Iceland as our proposal for Iceland's national contribution to IDIL 2022 to 2032, we have emphasized a number of areas. Firstly, we emphasize projects that relate to small linguistic environments, minority languages, and multilingualism. We also emphasize the importance of translation for small linguistic and minority languages. And we have proposed an idea for Iceland to host a global forum for discussions on the impact of language contact on small linguistic environments and on minority languages. We're looking very much forward to a collaboration with the government on our vision for Iceland's participation in the decade. The decade will certainly be an important framework for our activities at the Vigdis International Center, and many of our recurring annual events, such as the West Nordic Day, the Roma Days, the Sami National Day, the International Day, and Mother Tongue Day, they will all be part of the IDIL framework. In the years to come, we'll also host workshops for writers and poets of the West Nordic region, and this will be done to strengthen the dialogue and create a platform for writers and poets in the region who write in small, indigenous or minority languages, where they can discuss language relations, translations, and other issues that they have in common. We will also host seminars and workshops for translators of small and minority languages. This is done as a continuation of a very fruitful tradition at the University of Iceland. There is a strong tradition of translation studies and translation practice here. We do this to promote increased cooperation between scholars and professionals in the field of translating small and minority languages. Luckily, we already detect great interest among our colleagues in Sápmi, in the West Nordic countries, and among the Romani authors to collaborate on these issues. So, to conclude, our overall goal at the Vigdis International Center is to create bridges between academia, language practitioners, and communities, as well as cultural institutions and organizations. As a continuation of this opening event, we will also launch our Icelandic IDIL webpage, where we will document, promote, and share recordings of our events. We will also share information about the global IDIL projects, activities, and results on this website. So we would very much like to welcome all of you at our events in the future, and we look forward to sharing the activities that we collaborate with our network on the website as well. Have a wonderful day, and I look forward to seeing you later when we will have the opportunity to hear in detail about the work of Kathy Fredriksen, Jonat Mikkelsen, and Peter Austin. Thank you.
Next, I would like to welcome Birna Arnbjörnsdóttir, Professor Emerita, representative of Iceland in the steering committee of IDIL and director of the Living Lab.
Good morning. I'm delighted to be with you, even though by remote. Congratulations to the recipients of the Vigdis Award and congratulations on the opening of the Living Language Lab. The opening today was to be in conjunction with the launch of UNESCO's International Decade of Indigenous Languages. I am proud to represent Iceland on the task force for the decade and to join the steering committee next year. The launch was postponed until June, though, but on April 27th next, our own Sofia Zahova will represent the Vigdis Institute and present our national agenda for the decade at a side event of the UN Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues in New York City. One of the contributions of the Vigdis Institute to the decade is the exhibit that we're opening today. The exhibit is meant to send a message to young people that we have more in common than what separates us, and that this is true of languages as well. The target group for this exhibit is young people or young adults, but the exhibit can, of course, be enjoyed by people of all ages. The exhibit includes activities that can be even easily exchanged, such in different types of linguistic experiments, and then there are more permanent exhibits as well. The exhibits are the exhibit itself is supplemented with educational materials that we send out to schools for students to work with before, during, and after their visit. The first large permanent exhibit is meant to represent the voices of all Icelanders and how their diverse language repertoires enhance Icelandic culture and our ability to communicate with the rest of the world. Language diversity is truly a gift. The second exhibit is the Tree of Languages, which depicts the life cycle of languages and how we lose up to 9 languages each year. The falling leaves represent the languages that are in danger of extinction, and the leaves on the ground represent languages that we have already lost. The branches then represent languages that still have speakers, many speakers. Now, the interactive language map is the third permanent exhibit, and it's an effort to describe a sample of the world's languages. This includes where they're spoken, number of speakers, audio samples, and little tidbits of fun facts. Needless to say, swear words and insults are popular. I especially would like to thank Professor Peter Austin, whose book, 1,000 Languages, provides the groundwork for the map. This work would not have been accomplished without Peter's enormous contribution, not only to the exhibit, but also for his support and input in the development during the development of the mission and purpose of the Vigdis Institute. Thank you very much indeed, Peter. I would also like to thank the many without whose support we wouldn't be here today. First and foremost, our rector, Jón Atli Benediktsson, former and current deans, Guðmundur Halldórsson or Ólöf Garðarsdóttir, the team at Gagarin, Origo, Kristján and Hjörtur at Andrum, and especially Guðmundur R. Jónsson and his team. Guðmundur, thank you for your continued support for this project. Of course, none of this would have happened without Vigdís Finnbogadóttir and Auður Hauksdóttir. Thank you, Vigdís, and thank you, Auður. Personally, I would also like to thank our team of specialists. You know who you are. And also to Ásdís Rósa, thank you for your patience. And I bow again to Halldóra Þorláksdóttir for her perseverance and for keeping the project together all this time. To our financial backers, I say thank you, thank you, thank you. And then finally to Valgerður, Halldóra, Ann-Sophie, Ásdís, and Eyjólfur, I wish you the best of luck in the future. Thank you very much indeed. Enjoy the rest of the day. Goodbye.
Thank you, Birna, for being with us. And last but not least, I would like to welcome Professor Peter Austin Mosoas from the University of London. Peter, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I must say that I am utterly delighted to be here today. I met Vigdis 19 years ago in Paris at a UNESCO event, in fact. It was one of the founding activities when UNESCO started to pay attention to issues about threats to linguistic diversity. And we had a a nice meeting and a chat there, and my engagement with Iceland has followed on from that. It began as a set of ideas and thoughts and scribbles on paper, and finally has now materialized into this wonderful center named after Vigdis, and also the fantastic exhibition which is being opened today. I was given a sneak tour of the center yesterday, and it brought tears to my eyes to see that in concrete reality we have the results of all of the ideas and thoughts and much burning of midnight oil and hard work of the whole team of people who've been involved over the years with it. This was, I guess, a dream of Vigdis 19 years ago when we first met, and it's just wonderful now to see the reality come into existence. I think it's outstanding that the perspective taken by the centre and the new exhibition is to engage with younger people, with teenagers, with young adults, because they really are the future for the development of understanding of the significance and importance of multilingualism, multiculturalism, language diversity, and understanding also the threats that exist to Indigenous languages and also to other minority and minoritized languages, not only in Iceland, but also around the world in a global sense. I'll have more to say about my perspective on that later today. So thank you very much for the invitation. Thank you to the organizers for their kindness and support, and congratulations to the University of Iceland, to the Vigdis Center, to the local UNESCO organizing committees for what is an outstanding opening of the International Decade for Indigenous Languages. And I hope that there will be future opportunities for us to collaborate and to develop the broadness of understanding and appreciation for Indigenous and minoritized languages that they totally, totally deserve in the next 10 years and so on. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you all for your excellent talks. This was the first half, and I encourage you to stay with us for a coffee break and come again here into the aula for the second half, where we'll have very exciting talks. So please stay with us here for the coffee, and we'll see you later. Thank you.
Dear Vigdis, dear colleagues, dear distinguished guests, prize holders, we are gathering again for the second half of today's event, and now we will get into the substance of things. We will get to hear about the work that Kati, Jónhart, and Peter are doing, and we will get to hear the reactions from the prize holders on receiving the award. Of course, we already had the joy of seeing their reactions and hearing words from them and words from our minister online. But as one of my colleagues said, we had enough of that already, seeing everything online. So now we are here together. The Vigdis Prize is presented annually to an individual who has pursued new and original cultural, and especially linguistic paths in their work. In 2020, Jon Hart Mikkelsen, Faroese linguist, teacher, and publisher, was the first person to be awarded the Vigdis International Prize. Since he established his publishing company Sprotdin, more than 400 books have been published with their support, and approximately 20 online dictionaries. Jon Hart was awarded the prize for the remarkable work that he has done and that he is still doing in supporting and strengthening Faroese language on various platforms. Kati Fredriksen, who is also with us today, received the Vigdis International Prize last year for her significant contribution to the languages of Greenland. Kati's achievement in drawing attention to Greenlandic language issues, both domestically and internationally, is really remarkable. And she has done so, as we learned before, in poetry, scholarly writing, in the political arena, through children's literature, and participation in the public debate. The prize was awarded in 2020 and in 2021 at a time when, as we know too well, it was difficult to travel and it was difficult to gather at all. But today, we're all here. We have the honor and great joy to have both of the prize holders with us. And now they will first share their brief reactions to the prize with us, and after that we will hear more about their work. Jon Hart, since you received the prize first, I'd like to invite you to come up here and share some thoughts on receiving the prize, and then Kati, and after that we will, as I mentioned, proceed to hear more in depth about the work that you do.
Thank you. Dear Vigdis, 2 years have passed since I received my award, Revitalizing Vigdisar, and I was stunned at the time. And I must admit I'm still a bit baffled by it, by your decision. Your acknowledgement and your recognition of our effort, they do surprise me, but they very definitely also contribute to making the task worthwhile. It didn't even cross my mind anyone outside the Faroes would take notice of what we were doing there. So I'd like to repeat what I said 2 years ago, that I am overjoyed because this honor carries your name, Vigdis Finnbogadottir. For you have, like no other world leader, turned the spotlight on small language groups, language spoken by a few people, and you do not tire of pointing out that they still encompass the whole world. So I thank you once again from the bottom of my heart.
And Kati, you also have the chance to share your thoughts on the prize with us. Thank you.
Thank you. First of all, I would like to express my deepest thanks to Vigdis Finnbogadottir for her tireless work for languages. And I am also very thankful for the rector of the University of Iceland, Jon Atli Benediktsson, and the Icelandic government, Minister of Culture and Business Affairs, Lilja D. Alfredsdottir, and very thankful for the Vigdis Finnbogadottir Institute of Foreign Languages for awarding the Vigdis Prize in recognition of my contribution to the Greenlandic language through my education, work, engagement in public discourse and literature. I have never imagined getting such an award. When I got an email from the rector of the University of Iceland last year, where he asked me on behalf of the committee if I would like to receive the award, I got very emotional. I was grateful, surprised, and moved by the acknowledgement that I was about to receive. Thank you for the recognition of the work I have contributed. It's a great honor for me to receive the prize. Thank you very much. Victor's Prize means a lot to my further work. It gives me courage and more energy to continue working with languages in my country and cooperating with other countries. Today we are celebrating the opening of the International Decade of Indigenous Languages here in Iceland. Thank you for giving me a safe place to talk about the importance of language. Finally, I would like to thank those I have worked closely with in Iceland, the Faroe Islands, the Nordic countries, and other countries, and to my good Icelandic colleague Auður Högsdóttir and my Icelandic friend and colleague Halla Rún Lukadóttir. I look forward to being part of this day today with you, and thank you. Takk.
So, now we have the opportunity to hear about the work of our three distinguished guests. And it will be as follows. First of all, Jónhart will give a presentation of his own choosing, an insight into his work. Kati will do the same, and as will Peter Austin. We'll begin with you, Jónhart. I will first say a few more words about you, so you can just sit back and see if you recognize yourself. Jónhart Mikkelsen, a linguist, publisher, teacher, translator. Through his work, Jónhart Mikkelsen has made a significant contribution to strengthening the Faroese language as a living language in the age of globalization. In 2000, no, sorry, we're a bit further back. 1993, he founded the publishing house Brotin, and it is still a key institution in building bridges between the Faroese language and the world's other languages. Jónhart has worked on dictionaries between Faroese, English, and Danish, and contributed to the development of a number of electronic bilingual dictionaries, most recently between Faroese and Greenlandic. The dictionaries and their use has been successfully adapted to the latest technology. On Sportin's website, you can now find 20 online dictionaries. Some are still in development. They're in open access and they're free of charge. In this way, Jónhart Mikkelsen has contributed to a radical change in the access of foreigners to Faroese and Faroe language users to foreign languages. Unsurprisingly, the dictionaries are widely used by both Faroese and people of other nationalities. Mikkelsen was born in Vestmanna, where he lives with his family. He studied English at the University of Aarhus and Faroese at the University of the Faroe Islands. He has taught Faroese at high school and university level. He was a member of the Faroese Language Council, and he has been a publisher of the newspaper Fregnir from 2001 to 2004. I think it's clear to all of us that Jónhart Mikkelsen has created important conditions for the Faroese language to thrive and develop in contact with the world's other languages. So with no further ado, Jónhart, you're welcome to step up here and tell us more about your work.
This morning I intend to strike an optimistic note. It's going to be very unacademic, but hopefully optimistic. I'll tell you a success story from the Faroes. How many, or several upper secondary school teachers managed to write dictionaries, create a digital platform to put them on, and as well as embark on publishing more novels in Faroese translation. We joined hands and changed our way of thinking about language teaching. We laid down a strategy which actually surpassed all our dreams. This project is not going to solve all the problems facing the Faroese language, but it is an example of how a change in mindset can result in a change for the better for small languages. It is a story of an enterprise which has been going on for the last 30 years and which is based on a firm conviction that dictionaries and publishing books in Faroese are necessary in the task of preserving and developing the language which approximately 70,000 people speak. This is not the ultimate remedy, definitely not, but it contributes to the efforts that need to be made all the time. Before I begin to talk or to tell you the story of the dictionary project, let me give you an overview of the situation today. So far, we have published 16 dictionaries, most of which are small, bilingual, or with 15,000, 20,000 entries. They are extensive enough for language teaching at upper secondary level. Most of them are being edited on a regular basis, so they are becoming more and more extensive. The big dictionaries, they comprise of somewhere between 60 and 80,000 entries, lemmas. The task is, of course, split between a number of editors and a number of publishers, but we all unite and present the dictionaries on a platform called Språten. It's the logo of the Språten. It's not a farming community, but it reminds you of something like farming, but it was originally done because we wanted to show we were going to cultivate something new. Well, these are the books that the dictionaries that we have worked on so far. We have one monolingual Faroese. We have English, and we have Danish, German, Spanish. We have Greenland. Now we have Russian, French, and Italian. We have Chinese and a Greenlandic one. In addition to this, we have a dictionary of synonyms, one of idioms, and we are beginning to have a small encyclopedia on the side as well. So these are the dictionaries which are available now. And as far as books goes, approximately 200 books are being published in Faroese annually, and compared to the number of books, of course, published in the Nordic countries, this is next to nothing. However, considering that only 50,000 people live in the Faroes, it's actually quite a bit. And to us, it makes a world of difference. Språten, the publishing house that I head, has published approximately now 500 books. And with the years, we have settled into a rhythm where it's possible to publish about 25, 30 books a year. Last year, we published 32 titles, of which about half were original Faroese, the rest being translations. It seems that new poets, short story writers, novelists emerge all the time, and musicians, they sing Faroese lyrics. So I think young people, they identify with the language. That's not a problem. We are convinced that every text translated into Faroese of course, in addition to all the things originating in Faroese, they support and they sustain our language. So, in short, we are engaged in this never-ending fight for our particular language in the world. Here is a selection of the books. I'll try to give you an impression of the variety that we do. We try to, as you can see, we try to combine modern literature from various parts of the world with classical works. And in addition to Sproten, I must say, in addition to Sproten, there is a big publishing house fully devoted to children's books and books for adolescents. So this is part of what we are doing. And of course, these books are available as audiobooks as well on Mofibo and BookBeat. Well, this is the overview. Having given you this overview of the current state of affairs, you're now ready to dive into the story of the online dictionaries. We embarked on this project in the 1980s. We were a number of newly graduated teachers employed at the Faroese Upper Secondary School in Tórshavn. I was in my mid-20s, and I loved teaching. The saying goes, if it works, don't fix it. But that's actually what we did. Even though all the things working perfectly well at the school, there were basic things which were not to our satisfaction. There was a flaw embedded in the system, or it can be interpreted as just time and development catching up with a few things which needed to be revised. The problem was that the school did not focus enough on Faroese. The teaching was naturally in Faroese, the discussions were in Faroese, but the textbooks were all Danish. It was, in simple terms speaking, a good, solid Danish upper secondary school with a strong Faroese element, which means that Faroese played a supporting role in the Faroes, which in itself is bound to be wrong. It was not wrong at the very beginning, when the school was founded in the 1930s, but 50 years on, there was time for a change. In Faroese schools at this level, Faroese must have a central place. So when French and German, English, Latin, Russian were taught, we had to use Danish dictionaries and work from there into Faroese. And these were the books that we used. They're all Danish. And it is evident from this that there is something basically wrong. This meant that every time a Faroese student translated a text or a word into Faroese, they went through Danish dictionaries, and very often they were stuck in the Danish translation. The benefit of learning Danish, of course, in this way is that our students were quite fluent in Danish, and Danish became a road into the Scandinavian languages. And through Danish, we preserved the Nordic dimension, which is of the utmost importance to us, a thing we must never, ever rid ourselves of. But we were convinced that we missed a great opportunity to make these students more conscious of their own language and what your native tongue really means to your identity as you acquire foreign languages. So while expanding your vocabulary and becoming conscious of the foreign languages, you ought to gain a deeper and more profound understanding of your own language through, for example, translations. Our popular slogan then was, "A journey into a foreign language is also a journey into your own language." At this point, it became evident that we needed a new strategy. We had to prepare ourselves to deal with the big languages directly and not through another language. But I dare say that even thinking about it, the task was daunting. The venture seemed overwhelming. But it so happened that as the idea matured, it coincided with the digitization of society. Things which had been awfully time-consuming to produce could all of a sudden be done much faster, with less effort, at lower cost, and frequently with much better result. So the next core question was, if we are not fully satisfied with the situation, who is going to do something about it? Whom are we waiting for? We did not have an abundance of lexicographers in the country, but the country was teeming with upper secondary school teachers who had studied languages. So we had to do with us, which meant we had to take on the task ourselves because there was no one else to do it. We started in the 1980s, as I mentioned. We spent a decade discussing the pros and cons of what we want to do and how to go about it. And we found out that the problem was primarily in our own mindset. We had been convinced that it was almost an impossible task to produce all these dictionaries. But very soon it appeared it was not. The only thing preventing us from embarking on this endeavor was a fixed idea that it was impossible. In 1993, we published the first English Faroese dictionary. We signed an agreement with the Danish publishing house Gyldendal, and we were given permission to translate their English-Danish into English Faroese. It was on the market on a sunny day in '93, and it turned out to be a success. And the reaction was prompt. If that was possible with English, so why not proceed with German, French, Spanish? We agreed, however, that it was a matter of course that all of us would be somehow working through Danish, because Danish is our second language, and all the dictionaries are available in Danish. So in order not to spend all our energy on solving the same problems and figuring out the same solutions, we edited a big Danish Faroese dictionary of 80,000 lemmas. It was published in 1998, 5 years later. The very same year, for the first time ever, a large monolingual Faroese dictionary was published. It had been in the making for many years, and now it was ready for print. So actually, we had all the foundation for the rest of the production before the turn of the century. So these were the books that we relied on before we really took off. We had the English Faroese, the Danish Faroese, and the monolingual Faroese. And the work took off, and in the course of 10 or 15 years, we produced the dictionaries I showed you at the beginning. This line, the dictionary. And in the pipeline now, we're finishing the Greenlandic project. We've been working on Japanese for 3 or 4 years. We have embarked on a Portuguese dictionary, and we'll continue with the Italian one. And these two, we hope, will be on the platform within a short period of time. I know these two books they are completed here in Iceland. I'll just take I'll take a trip to Akureyri perhaps and find out if we can include them on our platform. But we ought to do it because the communication between Iceland and Faroes is so massive. You're translating texts all the time. We reached the second stage of the project around 2010. That's when we started working on the online versions of the dictionaries. It was a process plagued by a multitude of problems in the beginning, but finally we hit a nail and were able to present a digital platform that functioned impeccably well. People started subscribing to the online versions at once, and very soon schools followed. But most schools and the public institutions were using the online dictionaries, a new issue arose. If pupils are allowed to use online dictionaries in their exams, and if only some of them have access to the resource in their daily lives and studies, it can be argued that they do not take their exam under equal conditions. To remedy the situation, an agreement was made with the Ministry of Education. It took out a subscription on behalf of all the schools, which would give pupils access to the dictionaries at home as well. Now, this was fine, but one thing leads to another. The question was raised why only part of the population should benefit from the subscription taken out with taxpayers' money. Why not everybody? What if what if the government took out a subscription that would give all the taxpayers access to online dictionaries? That's what they did. Well, there was a new way of thinking which might pave way for the perfect solution. It was done, and people grew accustomed to using this tool. And by 2015, Faroese pupils and students had become so accustomed to having these dictionaries, which were updated on a regular basis, that when some of the politicians intended to stop the service, the pupils went on strike. I suppose this must be the first and only dictionary strike in history. It's not right. Wow. This is a collage of the situation when the students simply refused to attend classes without Sprotten, available free of charge. And before this happened, the Faroese students had turned the word Sprotten, the name Sprotten, into a verb, and they used this as Google. So when they say, I'm going to Google it, they say, "Vi sprota." They look up a word in the dictionary, they sprota. Well, after negotiating once more with the Ministry of Education and the National Association of Municipalities for some time, they agreed to extend the subscription and offer it to the world free of charge. That was the result. And this happened on the 15th of January in 2015, and it was announced in this way on our homepage, saying somewhere in the boundlessness, there are 13 Faroese dictionaries for you to use, free of charge and without any limits. So be our guest. This had been the vision, actually, from the very start. dictionaries free of charge for everybody. This was the optimal solution. If we had not come up with this solution, and people would people as individuals would be taking out subscriptions for the dictionaries, the Faroese language would still be limited to the Faroes and to a number of Faroese. Now, looking up words in spoken is a daily ritual for many, and perhaps the majority of the Faroese. And anyone outside the Faroes who has an interest in languages has access to this window into one of the world's small languages. Finally, I'll show you how this online dictionary platform works. I'll give you a very simple example. If you write the word kverkveitja, you'll see that the machine searches all the dictionaries at the same time. Within a split second, you see the word in every dictionary. And if you don't find it as a lemma, you can search in the explanation and find it there. This is an example of the word being found in the German Faroese. And we know that it is, as far as declensions and conjugations concerned, Faroese is quite complex, but you'll see all the inflections here. You can just look it up, and you'll find all the conjugations and declensions. And this page, so if you look at the right margin, you'll see when the various words are being inserted or added to the dictionary. Sometime in the future, when they talk about it, they'll write about the Faroese language history. They can look up and say, well, this word was added, on a certain date. We have added some 1,000 pictures to the newest dictionaries, and we intend to continue with that and combine it with the encyclopedia that we're working on. So if you press the picture, you can go into the the encyclopedia and find more out about the bird, for example, and what it sounds like, for example. And this is what reveals how many lookups and searches are on an annual basis. There will be approximately 13 million searches. And it's distributed like this. You'll see it sways between 500,000 to 0.500 million, making these 13 million searches a year. And this is what it looks like when we look at the use on a weekly basis. On a weekly basis, it sways between 200 and 400 lookups. Well, this is the end of the story I planned to tell you this morning, and I thank you for the opportunity.
Our next speaker will be Kati Fredriksen. Kati Fredriksen has been tireless in spotlighting the importance of the Greenlandic language for Greenlandic society and how important it is to promote the growth and the development of the language in all areas of human life and society. At the same time, Kati Fredriksen has also emphasized the importance of learning other languages. Fredriksen completed her master's degree in Greenlandic literature and media studies from the University of Greenland, Ilesimatusarfik, in 2011, doing part of her studies at the University of Alaska Fairbanks. She has been a member of the Greenlandic Language Council and worked for many years at the Language Secretariat of Greenland. In 2007, she also became the Minister of Education, Culture and Church in Greenland. Together with her colleagues at the Language Secretariat, she has made a great contribution to projects aimed at strengthening and developing the Greenlandic language, to equip it to meet the key challenges of using and participating in digital solutions. Kati Frederiksen continues to be a strong voice in highlighting how crucial it is for children and adolescents to speak and write in Greenlandic in order to strengthen their self-image, their awareness of their own culture, and last but not least, their belief in the future. Today, Kati Frederiksen is here to give her talk, Greenlandic is not for sale.
And Sophia, thank you so much for your words. You are maybe wondering about the title of my presentation, Greenlandic is not for sale. I will explain that at the end of my presentation. I have studied the Greenlandic language and literature from the University of Greenland, and as Sophia mentioned it, I have worked at the Language Secretariat of Greenland in 12 years, from 2008 until last summer. Today I'm self-employed, working with language and culture, and I'm also working on publishing Greenlandic books in my publishing house. Today I'm going to make a presentation on Greenlandic language in a historical perspective, but also what kind of challenges it has gone through and how it has managed to survive. Is it the next page? Yes. Let's take a look at this map. So many languages, between 6,000 and 700 different languages. And here we have Greenland with 3 dots. This map shows us that there are 3 languages spoken in Greenland. According to our legislation, the Greenlandic language is the official language in Greenland. And these 3 dots are the main dialects. It's West Greenlandic, North Greenlandic, and East Greenlandic. But each place, like every town and every settlement, has its own dialect. But we only have one orthography that we all have to follow. If we look a bit closer to the Greenlandic language, here we see Inuit languages. It's this whole area in red, all the way from the tip point of Russia throughout Alaska, Canada, and Greenland. This Inuit branch is divided into 3 major languages. It's Inupiaq, spoken in Alaska, where there are approximately 3,000 speakers, and Inuktitut, spoken in Canada, approximately 30,000 speakers, and in Greenland, approximately 50,000 speakers. So the number of people who speak their native language shows that the further you go to the west, the fewer people speak their native language. And in this case, Greenland is said to be in a good position because most of the children who have Greenlandic speaking parents learn Greenlandic as their mother tongue, while many Inuit children in Canada and Alaska usually have to learn their mother tongue or parents' language as a foreign language. Altogether, no more than 90,000 speakers of Inuit language worldwide, and all living in the Arctic. Here is an example how our language is combined. It's a polysynthetic language. It means that we have relatively long words containing of optional suffixes to express a syntactic relationship and meanings. Like we have one word here, sappomiusinyapunga. We have a word stem, sappomiusi, which means to make a presentation. And here we have suffix nia, which means that we going to or will. And here we have marking of mood, which is pu. And finally, we have this person ending nga, which means I. So it's completely the opposite compared to other languages like Nordic languages. Because you will start with I, we end the word with person, and yeah. That's just one example. So the descriptions of the Greenlandic language began in the middle of 1700 when the missionary Hans Egede came and settled around the area of Nuuk. Today, Nuuk is the capital of Greenland with approximately 18,000 people. Greenlandic language has been based on oral tradition without any formalized descriptions prior to contact with Europeans. When Hans Egede came to Greenland, he tried to make descriptions of our language, but he soon gave up because of the complexities of the language. Greenlandic language is completely different from the Nordic languages. Later, Hans Egede's sons helped him with the Greenlandic language. His sons learned the Greenlandic language, and they were able to work on translating the Bible, making terminology, and inventing new words. The first grammar was published in 1760, and the very first dictionary in 1761. They also, of course, received help from Greenlandic people. There were these women, Malia and Annasa, who helped Hans Egede's sons tirelessly. And the written language was standardized in the mid of 1800. In 1861, the first Greenlandic newspaper, Aduagagjutit, was published. It was Greenlandic, and it has been in Greenlandic only until 1950s. One can say that our written language is not very old, but compared to other Inuit languages, Greenland has a long tradition for written language. This Aduagagjutit that started in 1861, it brought Greenland into contact with the rest of the world. And lots of the literature, like Shakespeare, they were translated into Greenlandic and published in Aduagagjutit. And oral tradition was also documented from the middle of 1800 and in the beginning of 1900. And we have our first novel written by a Greenlander from 1914. So when Greenland was a closed country until World War II. So during the World War II, everything changed, also in a Greenlandic, in the history of Greenland. Greenland was an isolated country because Denmark wanted to safeguard the Greenlandic way of living and culture. They wanted Greenland to be untouched from the Western lifestyle, and therefore everything was primarily in Greenlandic before the war. In World War II, Greenland came under US control, and Greenlanders were very excited to opening up and seeing new cultures and wanted to be part of this global village. And thus, the isolation of Greenland ended here. In 1953, Greenland's status as colony of Denmark was officially terminated. With the new status as an equal part of Denmark, the Danification started. Soon the Danish language became dominant and was perceived as having a very high status. The kindergarten, hospital, schools, education institutions, and services were all in Danish. And the Danish language was seen as only key to the future. I might also mention that the English language, it was not until 1967 that English language was introduced into school system. So many, with this new school law from 1950, Danish language was learned at the expense of the Greenlandic language, because all these teachers came from Denmark and teaching every subject in Danish. And children were also split up into two groups. We had A class and we had B class, which means it's Danish speakers. And many parents choose their children to be part of this B class because they will have this access to education. But there were also many young Greenlanders, especially those who were studying in Denmark in the 70s. They felt that the Greenlandic language and culture were threatened. Therefore, a protest movement started that also included the idea of achieving more self-determination through home rule. During this Danification, many became monolinguals with Danish as their first language. They were not using their parents' language. But this protest movement that I mentioned earlier, it resulted achieving the home rule in 1979. With this movement and after gaining home rule in 1979, Greenlandification occurred both at the end of 70s and in 1980s. Now Greenlandic was prioritized at the expense of other languages. So many became also monolinguals, having Greenlandic as their first language. In the Home Rule Act, it says the Greenlandic language is the main language. There must be thoroughly taught in the Danish language, but both languages can be used for official purposes. There were many productions of school books in Greenlandic in 70s and 80s. And in the beginning of 1990, there were established this Revitalizing, which means a good school. And it's a concept of a new school reform. And this reform, it was based on an integrated class system, which means that now they are not dividing children based on their languages. So with this integrated school, kids start to learn other languages. They start having Greenlandic from grade 1, also Danish from grade 1, English from grade 4, but today many municipalities have chosen that they also should start learning English from grade 1. So, like I have my daughter who started school 2 years ago. From grade 1, she had 13 different subjects, including Greenlandic, Danish, and English. Today, majority of the population is bilingual. And self-reported data show us that monolingualism is decreasing while bilingualism is increasing. And here is one of the newest data we have. But this data is, it's from 2018, and it's language use among young people from 15 years old till 34 years old. Here you can see Nuuk, which is the capital of Greenland, and other towns beside Nuuk, and the third is smaller settlement. Here, Nuuk, we have 53% who speaks fully bilingual, and it's the completely opposite if we look at the smaller settlement. Here we have 68% who spoke only Greenlandic. So the picture of Nuuk is different from the rest of the Greenland. I will come back to that later. We got self-rule in 2009. And people had a great expectations when we attained self-rule, especially regarding to Greenlandic language, because now Greenlandic language became the official language of Greenland. I think people expected that the government will start some initiatives and strengthen the Greenlandic language. And people expected that our language will be more accepted and being used in every aspect of the Greenlandic society. However, that is something that cannot be done overnight. With self-rule, the Greenlandic language became, as I said, the official language of Greenland. However, the government hasn't presented any plan for the language yet. We got a legislation towards language in 2008, 1 year after self-rule. But this is toward companies. And also private companies. If they have 10 or more employees, they should make their language policy, and language policy can contain, for example, an identification of the authority or the company's language skills and competences of the staff, So it's just a suggestion and not really a policy or a strategic plan. It was up to the companies to design or describe their own language policy. Today, Greenlandic language is a living language. Kids learn our language as mother tongue, and we use it in every aspect of our everyday life. But in Nuuk, the picture is different. Greenlandic is mostly used in our homes when we are with family and friends in our spare time. But Danish seems to have settled in Nuuk for now. And here we have big challenges of sustaining the Greenlandic language, because Greenlandic children, they learn Danish and English automatically, but Danish-speaking kids don't learn Greenlandic. So as a result of this system, we are creating two groups with different languages, just like we have seen before with this dividing classes in A's and B's. But with this integrated class system, it was not the case. It was the purpose of integrated class was that children should learn from each other. But Greenlandic has been under pressure enormously in the last 70 years, especially in educational sector, in administration, and in the business sector. So it's, from my own perspective, it's incredible that Greenlandic language still exists, and it has survived massive challenges. And even though the children have Greenlandic as the mother tongue, which is healthy for our language and the language community, but Danish is still dominant in certain domain areas. And I will come back to that later in our discussion. According to other indigenous languages, Greenlandic language is in a good position. We have developed some language tools like spell checker and some other language tools like text-to-speech system. And last year we released a translation machine from Greenlandic to Danish and Danish to Greenlandic. And this is a very game changer because we didn't have this before, and many things it was impossible project because Danish and Greenlandic is completely different from each other. And this machine has been made by the rules, like grammatical rules. It cannot be done statistically. Yes, now I have promised you that I will explain my title of my presentation. Greenlandic is not for sale is the answer of a poem that I wrote in 2009 and published it in 2010. The poem is called Oqatit Duniniaket. In Greenlandic, it can mean two things. The first meaning could be languages for sale. The second meaning can be words for sale. Now I will summarize the poem because it's 2 pages long, but the poem starts like this. Since I'm losing my language, I try to find new options. I go outside in the afternoon, but fail to hear my language around me. I'm not using my beloved language. I'm becoming broke anyway. Maybe I should sell it. I took a piece of paper this morning and now I'm cutting it. one word for each piece of paper. I wonder what I should charge for this piece. I begin to write down the words. I'm getting quite confused now. Perhaps I should hold an auction. I'm getting excited. I wonder which words would sell more. I'll sell in the market outside Brosini. While I envision the potential buyers, it suddenly begins to snow. I arrive at the market full of anticipation, since it's after work hours when people go shopping. And people begin to buy words, but I do not know what they will use them for. Yeah. Thank you. Bueno.
Thank you very much to both of our prize holders, to Kathy and Jon Hart. And now it is our great pleasure to welcome our last speaker today before we have the final discussion. It is our great pleasure to introduce Professor Peter Austin. After a long and successful academic career in his native Australia, in Hong Kong, in the US, Japan, Germany, and the UK, Peter Austin has been Emeritus Professor at SOAS University of London since 2018. Peter earned his PhD at the Australian National University in 1978, with his thesis entitled A Grammar of the Diari Language of Northeast South Australia. Peter then taught at the University of Western Australia, held fellowships at UCLA and MIT, and in 1981 he became the head of Department of Linguistics at La Trobe University in Melbourne. Peter Austin was appointed the Merit Rousing Chair in Field Linguistics at SOAS in London in 2003, and then Emeritus Professor in Field Linguistics after his retirement. Throughout his career, Peter Austin has been deeply involved in work to document and describe languages that are otherwise on the verge of extinction. In 2020, he was awarded the Levelholm Emeritus Professorship to work on a dictionary of Diari, the language he did his PhD on, and a biography of the Diari teacher that he had, Ben Murray. In addition, Peter Austin has won numerous other awards, including the Alexander von Humboldt Foundation Humboldt Research Award, which he was actually awarded twice. Peter received an honorary doctorate at the Faculty of Languages at Uppsala University for playing, and I quote, a crucial international part in drawing attention to endangered languages. Peter has done fieldwork on 12 Australian Aboriginal languages, particularly those from northern New South Wales, northern South Australia, and northwest Western Australia. He's still especially interested in the language Diari. From 2011, he has been working with the Aboriginal Corporation on the revitalization of the language. In 2013, he published a draft of a Diari dictionary, and since 2013, he's maintained a blog on the language. The blog is one of a number of language revitalization and reclamation activities held in conjunction with the Diari community. Austin has also been a part of the International Advisory Board of the Vigdis International Center, and his work, as Birna mentioned earlier, has been a great inspiration for the exhibition, The Living Language Lab. Today, Peter Austin is with us to give his talk entitled Revitalizing Indigenous Languages and Cultures, a Global Perspective. The floor is yours, Peter.
Well, thank you very much for the very kind words of introduction, and thank you all for coming along today to be part of this celebration. So I'm going to give you a kind of global view of issues around Indigenous and minoritized languages, and I'll actually try and tie in a little bit about what Kati and our colleague from the Faroes have also been telling you as specific case studies of examples of the sort of thing I want to introduce. Now, I will make the slides for this talk available on my website if anybody wants to have a look at them later, or there's a whole bunch of references which are part of the slides. So if you're interested in following up, you can go to my website. A lot of the work that I'm going to talk to you about was done in collaboration with my former colleague at SOAS, Julia Salabank, and I absolve her from anything that I might say that will be completely wrong. So Julia's been a wonderful partner in this kind of research. So let me just quickly give you an overview of where we're going. Based on sort of research and studies of existing literature, combined together with my own hands-on work with Indigenous communities, primarily in Australia, as was mentioned. I've been doing field work with Australian Aboriginal people for the last 50 years, and I'll draw on some of that experience to give some theoretical and practical suggestions about the sorts of policies and actions that might be taken in terms of maintaining and revitalizing and supporting not only languages, but also the cultures that those languages are used to express. And I'll focus in on how these might be applied at individual, family, and also group levels. Because there are different ways in which we might respond at each of these kind of levels of organisation. So, quickly give you some background about global and local diversity. We've already seen some discussion about this, so I'll just quickly go over some of the main points, some of the threats to that diversity that exist, and the sorts of processes and causes that give rise to language shift. So the situation that Kati mentioned, where communities, whole groups of people in Greenland shifted from speaking Greenlandic to speaking Danish. So that process we call language shift. And is there a way to turn that back, to reverse what actually goes on? And she showed us that in the Greenlandic case, with a lot of hard work and effort over time, that they have actually achieved that. And what are the implications of those pointers for the sorts of things we can do to support languages? What can individuals and families do? What can communities do? What can researchers, outside researchers such as myself or others in this room who work with Indigenous communities, what can we do? And what can groups and institutions do? And I'm really delighted that some of the points I'm going to make about institutional are exemplified in the Faroese publications and the Greenlandic publications that were mentioned. Okay, so how many languages are spoken in the world today? Well, nobody really knows, and it's so hard to make a distinction between language and dialect and so on. But we have a definitive listing, the Ethnologue, which tells us that there's exactly 7,097 as of today, probably 7,096 in a month's time or whatever. Okay, so it's roughly 7,000, but difficult to count. But the global distribution of languages is very uneven and very skewed, because the actual populations who speak those 7,000 languages range from 1 billion
in the case of Mandarin Chinese to 1 in the case of Diari, for example. We have one old lady who is the last person to fluently speak the language. And sadly, in the case of Australia, there are many languages in that position. Very, very, very small numbers of speakers. So there's this really skewed distributions. And in fact, if you take the top 6 languages in terms of population, those 6 languages there listed have half of the world's population that speak them. This is shocking when you think about it. Half of the world speaks just 6 languages. In fact, the top 200 languages are spoken by 96% of the world's population. Okay, you remember those 7,000? The vast bulk of them have tiny speaker numbers in comparison. So we have this massive imbalance between large international and national languages and linguistic diversity. The figures are also skewed in terms of geography, because what we find is that Asia and Africa have 2/3 of the world's linguistic diversity. You see that tiny little slice there in yellow? That's Europe, the whole of Europe. Okay, so Europe, although we know there are hundreds of languages, in fact, 100 spoken here in Iceland, for example, that's nothing compared to the diversity we get in Asia and Africa. Now, when we look at individual communities, we can create profiles of them. And through the work of UNESCO and other organisations, we have identified several factors that can allow us to examine community profiles. The first of these is intergenerational transmission. In other words, are children speaking the language of their parents? Is it being passed from one generation to the next? Actually, I shouldn't say parents, I should say children speaking the language of their caregivers, because sometimes that may not be their parents. Okay, second is, what's the percentage of the total population who actually use that language? So not the population itself, but how many of those people? So you might get a population like Navajo, for example. Navajo, the largest group in the US, 200,000 people, but only a tiny fraction of those people actually speaking Navajo. So we have to look at the relativities. What are the domains and functions in which the language is used? So Kati told us that Greenlandic is primarily used in the domain of the home, with family and friends. It's a language of intimacy. It's a language of chatting and talking in the home. So it has certain functions. It's not used in other functions. And this is also true for many, many languages, that we can divide according to domains and functions. A fourth factor is attitudes and ideology of the wider community. So is the larger community within which Indigenous populations and minorities populations live, do they have a positive evaluation, positive attitudes towards diversity? Do they recognise the Indigenous languages or not? The fifth factor is the speakers' ideologies and attitudes themselves. Do they have a positive view and they feel, oh, we should be speaking grandmother's language. We should continue to learn it. We should be speaking it. We should be, every time we have an opportunity, we should be able to, communicate in our language. Do they have pride, or do they alternatively say, it's this horrible horrible way of talking. I want to get rid of that. We can't even write it. It's an awful language. Do they have shame towards it? And both attitudes are not uncommon. So these kind of factors, and there have been various other more complex linguistic studies, they give us a sort of typology of situations. So a language, an Indigenous or minoritized language, can be viable or safe or strong, where it's spoken by all age groups, it's being passed to children, actively supported, positive valuation by the speaker community and by the wider group. Now, these can be relatively small populations. So, for example, in the Pacific island nation of Vanuatu, you might have 500 speakers of a language, and you'd say, wow, it's tiny, what's the chance? What hope has it got? Actually, these are very strong, viable languages used by everybody and strongly supported and very positive. So you don't have to have millions, you can actually have small, coherent communities. A second category is an endangered language, and these are socially, economically disadvantaged and typically under heavy pressure from a larger language spoken by reducing populations. So as Kati mentioned, the Inuit languages spoken in Alaska are endangered. They are under immense pressure from English. Children are really, only small numbers of them are learning the languages, and they have shrinking restricted domains of use. Third category is Moribund, which is where children are not learning them at all, and if you have any speakers, they're typically very old people, and the language is only ever used when those old people happen to meet one another, and maybe they want to talk about, oh, guess what the neighbours were doing, and nobody can understand what they're talking about. Many, many Indigenous languages in the US, in Canada, in Australia, in South America are in the position of being moribund. The dominant languages, particularly those top 6 that we saw before, are replacing the Indigenous tongues. And the final station for languages is extinct. That is, there are no native speakers, maybe people know a word or two, maybe they remember a few words for recipes or, types of food that their grandmother used to cook, but they don't speak the language at all. And what we can see, Kati showed us a version of this map. What we can see, this is a kind of an attempt to map out languages around the world, the 7,000 or so. The ones in red are endangered, and the ones in yellow are threatened with possible endangerment. Thank you. What you can see here, if you look at the map, is that there is a broad band around the equator, just to the north and the south of the equator, which is where all this language diversity is located. And in fact, some linguists have suggested that we can identify language hotspots. This is where there is massive diversity, but also enormous language shift taking place, so that languages are highly endangered and moribund. And you can see where these language hotspots are located on the map. And the red spots, in particular, Northern Australia, Central South America, and in Siberia and the far east of Russia, and the Pacific Northwest. These distributions also coincide with hotspots of flora and fauna diversity, precisely the zone in which we get ecological variation and so on. We find linguistic and cultural variety and evaluation. Now, a language shift has been taking place all around the world, sometimes as a result of disease and genocide. But most languages, what we find is that it's a generational replacement. And in the last 40 years in particular, all around the world, there has been radical reductions in speaker numbers, often in 1 or 2 generations, with children and young people shifting to the more dominant social and politically powerful ways of speaking. And the result is increasing age profiles, lack of transmission to children, and loss, ultimately. The Endangered Languages Project, which is based in Hawaii, and I recommend them to you as a place to go for more information, they've been mapping out the the available material across the whole world, and they estimate that about every couple of months we have speakers disappearing. So we know exactly, last month I can tell you, the language which was spoken on Tierra del Fuego called Yagan, the very last speaker of that, who grew up speaking it and who was fluent, she died last month. So this process is going on all the time, and languages are being lost. Why? What's the reasons? Well, this is highly variable, and there are combinations of factors that are at play. Some of them are demographic. Some, as I've suggested earlier, are socio-economic, having to do with politics, with opportunities for employment, access to education, and so on. Some are political. Kati already showed us, in the case of Greenland, the kind of shifts in politics and the movement from being a colony to becoming a part of Denmark to becoming self-governing to a greater degree of independence. Attitudes, as I mentioned before, can also cause shift. So negative attitudes tend to promote shift, and positive attitudes can, depending on people's activity, support and prevent shift. So there can be internal attitudes that have an impact along with external ones. And this varies according to the politics and the particular society. Another factor which Julia Salabank and I have written about is the important role of ideologies and beliefs. That is, the sort of shared patterns of belief that people have about how languages exist in the world and what they're good for and why we should speak them or use them. So these are kind of socio-culturally motivated ways of thinking that people have. Often not taught explicitly, but implicitly developed as people become social beings. Okay, I'll skip over this. It really has to do with predispositions and strongly held ways of thinking. And that can lead to language practices, which is what people are actually doing, and language policies, which is what should people be doing. Government statements about, oh, you should study this language or that language or whatever. So ideologies, I want to sort of emphasize here, have a really important role to play in understanding language diversity and particularly the kind of shift. Well, how could we respond? What could we kind of do about it? Well, one possibility is to encourage shift. Adopt a hegemonic ideology which says my children would be much better off if they spoke the dominant language. Okay? So I'm a Bengali living in London. I don't want my children to learn Bangla because it's going to hold them back. They would be much better off to speak English. So I and my wife will speak Bangla to each other as a sort of intimate language, but we'll talk English to our children. That's encouraging the shift to take place. Now, this is quite a dominant attitude in quite a lot of families. The second view is to be apathetic and don't care. Well, I don't speak to my children in Greenlandic, but I hear it, I go out and I can hear, and I know up in that village way up in the eastern part, they're all talking Greenlandic, as Kati showed us, 86% of the population is speaking it, so I don't need to worry. Somebody will speak Greenlandic eventually, even if my kids don't. Because the problem with that is, what if the others aren't speaking to their children in Greenlandic? I was actually horrified. In 1980, I was in New Mexico at a summer school, and Navajo was spoken everywhere around you. People who were attending were speaking Navajo, and they told us the kids, lots of kids coming in from the reservation were speaking Navajo at home. Today, 40 years later, I think it's 0.5% of children coming to school speak Navajo. Okay, so that's one generation. It's changed. because they took the view, oh, well, people, you're Navajo, you speak Navajo. Well, actually, they weren't. The third is to reject personal responsibility and give that responsibility to other people or institutions. The school will look after my language. I don't need to speak it at home because the kids are learning it at school. Okay. Another possibility is to take responsibility and do something. Develop what we can call a family language policy. Okay, so to make decisions that you're actually going to do something in the face of a perceived potential shift, potential or real. Another option is to do what our colleagues, the prize winners, have done, and that is to take an active role in promoting the language and culture locally and in wider situations. Sometimes we use the term language activist to describe such individuals. Another option is to create the structures to support the language and culture. And this again was demonstrated to us by the two Vigdis Prize winners. Creating publications as an outlet, online dictionaries as a way to promote and support the languages and the cultures that they are both activists for. Well, why should we bother with this anyway? What's the point? The languages are dying. They're dying at, one every couple of months. We can actually date some of them and so on. Why should we bother? Well, one of the major arguments in favour of being concerned is connections to the past, to the ancestors, to the cultural heritage, to also helping people understand their own identity, who they are in terms of the world, what their social, cultural, historical place is in the world. What we find in many, many communities, Indigenous communities in particular, that there is massive confusion because all sorts of messages are being passed to people about positive and negative valuations and so on. Another possible argument for responding to the challenges to diversity is dealing with personal and historical trauma. So people that I have worked with in Australia have traumatic personal histories. They were taken away from their parents when they were very young. They were literally removed from their mother's arms because the government said, oh, these black people, these Aboriginal people are dying out. You would be so much better if you lived with a white family. And one of my teachers, for example, finally met her sister who'd been taken away and sent 2,000 kilometres away in Western Australia, and they met after 50 years of being apart. So the positive support for the language and the culture can help with the healing of that kind of traumatic experience that people have gone through. It can have a really important role in terms of building and strengthening communities as a way of politically strengthening and culturally strengthening individual communities. Can develop knowledge and culture, especially ecological knowledge and traditions. So in many Indigenous communities, there is incredible knowledge about the flora and the fauna, the plants, what the medicinal uses of those are, and so on. And engaging children in language and cultural revitalization can develop that knowledge and pass it to future generations. There's improvement to well-being and physical and mental health. So we know from research in Canada, in the United States, in Australia, that there are direct correlations between positive support for language and culture and the impact on such factors as youth suicide. Unfortunately, many Indigenous communities are racked with massive suicide problems. Children, young people, are simply killing themselves because they can't see a future. And by supporting their identity, their heritage, their history, their connection with their land and with their families, we can actually see positive results. And this has been empirically demonstrated in psychological research in the last 10 years in particular. We also know from psycholinguistic research that there are positive benefits from mother tongue education and multilingualism in terms of cognitive flexibility and direct benefits on conceptualization. There are also really positive results in terms of being empathetic with other communities and understanding that other people have other ways of seeing the world. And they can serve it can serve as a solid basis for learning other languages and for intercultural communication skills. So if you can speak multiple languages, you understand multiple cultures, it can help you getting a basis for intercultural communication and understanding. So what can we do? What can we as individuals or we as families do about this if we decide we want to make a positive response? Well, I suggest parents could discuss and make plans before children are born, if possible. This is what Bernard Spolsky has called family language management. So make an idea, develop over a period of time with discussions about how you're going to actually interact with children and with other people. If you decide you can speak the languages and pass on the cultures to children, one possibility that we frequently see is that the children will respond in whatever the dominant language is, even if you speak to them in the Indigenous or minoritized language. Well, just be persistent. Just be bloody-minded. Just keep insisting. And eventually, in many cases, you'll get the response that you're looking for. If you have families in which there are mixed heritages, then one possible family policy is the OPOL policy, one parent, one language. So in other words, if mother and father speak different languages, each of them uses only their own language or family language when speaking to the child. And children will then be exposed to two languages and grow up bilingual. Children are actually little experts in learning languages, and they can easily grow up with two or three. Kati already told us that in Greenland you've got Greenlandic, Danish, English. Right from year one, kids are exposed to them. They're fantastic at figuring these things out and picking up and learning them. They're going to learn the dominant language anyway, outside of the house, at school or with their friends. They're going to learn whatever their dominant language is. So at home, don't use that one, use the other ones that you want to promote. I was telling somebody one of the lovely examples I saw a few years ago actually was in Tallinn in Estonia. I went out to dinner I was there for a conference, and I went out to dinner at an Italian restaurant, and the waiters were all there speaking Italian and so on. There was a family sitting on the table next to me, father, mother, and a young boy. He looked like he was about 6 or 7 years old. Father was speaking to the waiters in Italian. Mother was speaking to some of the other staff in Estonian. And the parents were speaking English to one another. That child, I watched him, being a linguist, I have to observe all this stuff. When he wanted his dad or the waiter to understand, he spoke Italian. When he wanted his mum to understand, he spoke in Estonian. And when he wanted both parents to understand, he spoke in English. And he was using 3 languages for different purposes, for different functions, totally flawlessly in that particular context. So you don't have to be afraid that they might lose or they might lose out by having more than one language spoken at home. I'm sure people in this room don't need this message to be repeated, but So many times I've run into parents when we've been doing outreach. Oh, if I teach them Bangla, they won't have enough room in their brains to be able to put English, so we should only speak English. No. What can groups do? One thing is often the language situations are simply unclear. Individuals might understand what's going on with the people they interact with, but not with the wider group or the wider society. So we need to look at the language ecology, what languages are used by whom, when, and where, and see what factors might be impacting on shift and maintenance, and look at ways to address underlying social, economic, health, welfare factors that can play a significant role leading to language shift. It's not just about language, it's all these other things which are often much more powerful drivers. And share information, let other people know what's going on. I had an amazing interaction in Argentina many years ago. This was a conference at which Indigenous teachers were brought from Argentina to discuss opportunities. And I spoke about some of the work I've done in Australia. And I remember one of the teachers came up to me afterwards and he said, "This is amazing. You know, our community are worried because we've got 10,000 speakers. What you've been doing with 1 or 2 or 3 just shows us what the opportunities are." So looking at other case studies elsewhere can give people an idea. We can also bring the language out of the home to be part of the wider community landscape and create contexts where it can be used, like festivals, performances, interaction spaces, games, chat, information exchange, social media. The internet has introduced amazing opportunities to create spaces and domains where languages can serve and function. But be careful not to focus on hyper-traditionalizing the language and culture so that it just becomes the past, what we used to do. That will turn younger people off and they'll say, it's irrelevant. What's it got to do with me? And, you know, if I can't use it to talk about things that mean something to me, then that's not going to be valuable. So here's an example from Canada. Here you can see we have Cree, written in Cree syllabics, plus French and English, the two national languages. So this is making the language in the landscape as part of expectations. We're doing this, I've been working with a group in Western Australia to do this, and here's a popular camping ground that people like to go and, you know, camp and go swimming in the ocean, and the local Aboriginal group has said, well, its actual name is Wallawardo, and we're going to name it that. So bilingual signage. Similar things, putting up signs about, you know, which languages are spoken where. This is a lovely talking sign where you can go up to it and press a button and hear something in the language from that area. I've been doing language workshops working with, this is the Diari people from South Australia. One of the big things that they were really keen to do was writing songs and developing sort of a literary culture with songs and poetry. Now, far too often when linguists and teachers get involved, they think about songs, and what they tend to do is to translate the wheels on the bus go round and round, you know, that kind of nursery rhymes and so on. Well, the Diari said, no, we want songs that mean something to us. Like this song, which is about their country, northern South Australia, in summer, 45 degrees, temperature, 100 millimetres of rain per year, not per day or week, but 100 millimetres per year. And once in a while, occasionally, a heavy rainstorm. And what happens? A flood comes down the main, there's only one river in the area, a flood comes. And this is a cause for great celebration. So the flood is a focus of cultural identity to be part of that country, to celebrate that. And so they wanted to do a translation, and we did. We worked through a translation of the things that were important. And here there's lots of grammar, there's lots of structure, there's words, there's so on. I'm conscious of time. I can't really play this to you, but I have a recording if you're interested. Okay, so we can take policies and actions to increase speaker numbers, to increase domains, and there are several different approaches that have been taken around the world. Holiday camps, informal language lessons, and formal lessons, learning languages as subjects, or bilingual educational immersion, which is teaching in the minority language itself. We can actually help and support by working together with the specialist knowledge that teachers and local teachers and community members and cultural experts have to develop materials, things like the books and so on that we have seen for young adults and children. It's really important to emphasise that adults must be part of this process. You cannot give responsibility for language maintenance and revitalisation entirely to children. Okay, so adult education also has to be part of it. People should have the opportunity, you know, in the evenings to study their heritage language, to think about revitalising and supporting it. In the context of Australia, Canada, North America, Mexico, revitalisation is embedded within a broader ideology of dealing with the politics of resistance, that is addressing past injustices that have taken place, including present injustices in many areas, and also reconciliation, the notion that we can reconcile to these differences and build and develop a future in common. So we need to set our goals in terms of ideologies with achievable potential outcomes, not put people in a position where they are set up to fail. Major outcomes are also non-linguistic, and this is really important. Revitalising languages and cultures can have significant benefits in terms of self-esteem, social well-being, confidence, reduction in the truancy from school, and improving employment opportunities. And all of those intangible benefits must be incorporated in any understanding of what's involved in addressing language and cultural change. And can also deal with trauma and the psychological challenges that many communities face. I saw a recent a clip on YouTube recently where some Native people in America were responding to this idea, often promoted by dominant political parties. You red Indians, get over it. It's old history. Let's just move on. Let's think about the future. And the argument that this Native American person was saying, actually, no, we're not going to get over it. We're going to understand why it's happened, what went on, and ensure it never happens again. So it's really important that we get this balance right. There's some really useful resources. This book, recently published by Cambridge University Press, it's free and available online for free open access download. If anyone is really interested in how you might go about revitalising, there are case studies, there are particular examples, then I strongly recommend it to you. So, in a globalised world, we are not isolated and we can't escape linguistic and cultural issues and issues about rights. We can't afford a monocultural ideology, and understanding shift, loss and maintenance fundamentally requires understanding beliefs and ideologies, the meaning and value of languages and cultures. We can have responses at the level of individuals, families, groups, organisations and institutions, and things such as the Vigdis Centre can play a really powerful role in these kinds of responses. And my final point is, don't rely on schools as the place to focus your efforts. It also has to be embedded in the daily lives of people, groups, locations, and activities. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Peter. And now we have a few minutes for at least one question that I have for the three of you. So if you could join me here and just for some final reflections before we can all go to a relaxing reception afterwards in our home institution in Veröld. But I would really love for you to sit down for a moment and reflect on a question I have in connection to Peter's talk. So you're very welcome to come up here. Okay, so thank you. So my question today is inspired by all of your talks, and it will take a point of departure in your work, Peter. Some of the points you also made today, and I wanted just to enable us to connect some of the dots here at the very end of today's program. So both Faroese and Greenlandic would be categorized as viable languages, strong languages, in the sense that they are spoken by all age groups, they are learned by children, they are actively supported in different ways. But of course there are challenges that are specific to each of these languages. Challenges that are related to the profile of the speaker community that you outlined before, Peter. First of all, the question is, how well is the language transmitted between generations? The second aspect is the percentage of speakers as a relative number, and then which domains and functions of languages are in use, and for what is the language used, and then the importance of looking at the attitudes and the ideology of the wider community, including the recognition and status of the language. And your fifth point was about the emotional aspects, the ideologies and attitudes of the speakers. So I would want to start with you, Jónhart and Kati. It would be interesting to hear your take on this in relation to the to Faroese and Greenlandic. If you were to point out to us here the fields where there are challenges to your language, the challenges that you see in your daily life and in your work, what would you point to? If you would start with you, Kati.
According to Intergenerational Language Transmission, it hasn't been it has been easy to transmit the Greenlandic language before 1950. From 1950, where the Danification occurred, and also during 1960s, many parents choose their children to go to schools where there were Danish speaking class. And lots of children were also sent to Denmark. Some of them were only 5 years old, and some of them just started to go to school. And when they came back to Greenland, they have forgotten their language. So we have this generation who are not being able to speak their own mother tongue. So they cannot, of course, transmit the language to their kids. And we had this challenge for many years, and it's still going on. It's hard to talk about because it affects one's feelings. So when we discuss language in general, we are very careful not to insult others because it's very emotional. And one of the biggest challenges we have is that educational sector is basically in Danish. So children learn Greenlandic in the elementary school, but as soon as they enter the high school and other educational sector, it's in Danish. So here it's shift of languages, shift in cultures, and the way we see the world.
And then the question would be the same to you, Jonhard. In which sector or in which aspect of those 5 that Peter has outlined as the profile of the language community, where do you see the challenges to the Faroese language?
To put it bluntly, I think made this massive influx of English words into our daily language is the very big challenge. I mean, we are all roaming the internet every day, and it's opening the world, and whatever we do, there's no Faroese there. And we see all these fantastic things of gapping, of building bridges between cultures and all. Sorry?
Even closer.
Even closer. Mm-hmm. But to sum it up, it's awfully simple, actually. To put it bluntly, it is the very, very massive influx of English words into our daily language.
Where do you see the results of this influx?
Well, we can, as adults, we can certainly cope with a number of languages at the same time. That's no problem. What I'm especially alarmed about is the increasing use of English in children. I mean, children, they are susceptible to languages, and they imitate the games they see on the screens, and they transfer it all into their everyday lives. And now we see that the other day I was at a school, visiting a school, and they were actually all playing their games in English. And that I find alarming. That's number one priority now. What to do about it? And I have no idea.
And on that note, I think the last comment here will be from you, Peter, because I think it would be equally interesting to hear your take based on what you have unfolded for us today, based on your decades of experience and insight into these issues. What kind of support, just off the top of your head, and I'm putting you on the spot, would come to your mind when you hear about these challenges that Kathy and Jonhard are outlining for the specific situation of Greenlanding and Faroese?
Yeah, I think Kathy's made a very important point, which is we have to be very sensitive about people's sensibilities, about their history, about their own experiences. I mean, we had similar cases to kind of related to what she described in the case of Welsh. So Welsh went to complete immersion education in primary school, even for children whose parents do not speak Welsh. The kids go to school, they have to do their education. This is not just learning Welsh, it's also learning content, mathematics, science, and so on. And there are stories, anecdotes of children coming home and saying, why did you deny me the possibility? Why didn't you teach me Welsh when I was growing up? Why do I have to go through all this process now when I could have learned it at home? And the point was simply that at the time, it seemed to the parents that that was the best possibility for their children, either to speak English at home or, as Kati mentioned, send the kids to boarding school, English immersion environment. So we can't blame a generation because of the sociology and the culture and the politics at the time. These things change, sensitivities change, and we have to be respectful and be sensitive to those kinds of things. I understand what you're saying about the influx of English, and many communities respond in exactly the same way. Whether it's English or whether it's Spanish in the dominant Hispanic area, or whether it's French in Francophonie, parents and older people often saying this, this is a real challenge. Well, one opportunity with game playing is actually to develop games in the languages themselves. Any of you play Wordle? Wordle? Yeah, a couple of people here. You can play Wordle in French, Spanish, Italian, German. Why not Greenlandic? Why not Faroese? Why not Diari? It's a simple matter of having a little bit of, you've got the dictionaries and the resources, you just need to plug those in and so on. I know lots of communities that have set up Facebook sites where all the commands and all of the stuff is in the language themselves. I think it's about 200 vocabulary items you need. You send them to Facebook, they will help you set it up. So yes, it is a threat, it is a challenge, but with a bit of ingenuity and a bit of effort, I think we can respond to those threats. So I don't want to be a Pollyanna and say, the world is wonderful and so on. But I do want to say that what we've seen, particularly the last 10 years, 15 years, is really positive developments and lots of communities facing these challenges and dealing with linguistic and cultural and diversity and challenges to it.
I think that's just what we need, this kind of note, because we have so much. We hear so much about challenges and problems, and I focused on that. Our program is coming to a conclusion now, except for the fact that we would love for you to join us in Veröld, the neighboring building, the House of Vigdís, on the other side of Suðurgata. And there we will have a reception. The Living Language Lab exhibition is open, and the dialogue can continue. So all of you, Peter, Kati, Jonhard, Vigdís, dear colleagues and guests, thank you so much for participating in the launch with us today. It has been really lovely to spend the morning with you. And I think we have the perfect starting platform for our work with EDIL, being reminded that families, friendships, game playing, dictionaries, language policies, research is all part of the same big structure. And this is the work that we will all continue to do together between our different fields and countries. So we'll embark on these 10 years full of joy and hope. And we'll see you in Veröld in a moment. Thank you.